Welcome everybody in the room and watching us live on weforum.org and watching us via our Facebook channel. This is the first issue briefing. My name's Ollie. Of the day 2. It's on smart cities, building cities for the future. A perennially popular subject, I have to say, especially at this meeting here in Dubai. Maybe it's the venue. We're here in a very futuristic city. But I think it's also indicative of the fact that most of us live in cities these days, the people here at least, and more of us are. People don't really understand them still. So, you know, I'm quite keen to explore the reality of smart cities. I don't know if I live in a smart city yet. I don't know if I ever will. So we're going to come to a lot of these questions. We'll also be taking a lot of questions from our friends in the audience here, as well as, again, via our Facebook channel. But before we start doing that, before we kick off, I just introduce the panel here. To my immediate left is Ida Auken, member of the Danish Parliament. Catharina Elmsäter-Svärd is chairwoman of Drive Sweden. Catharina is an imposter on this smart city panel. She's a member of our mobility council, so she's going to be talking mainly about transportation, I believe, but I hope also lots of other things too. Carlo Ratti is director of SENSEable City Laboratory at MIT, the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. So, Carlo, let's start with you. You're a regular contributor to Forum Agenda, and your work is very well known around the world. Keen to explore with you where we are at with regards to actually making cities that are fit for purpose in the 21st century.
Thank you. Well, great pleasure to be here with you today. Well, you know, if you think about cities, I think it's useful to go back to the beginning of cities. You know, cities didn't exist once upon a time. 10,000 years ago, we didn't have cities. And then at one point, humanity discovered this beautiful thing that brings us together and allows us to make sure that the total is more than the sum of the individual parts. And cities, since the beginning, have been really a place for people to come together, to exchange ideas, to exchange chromosomes, to learn tolerance. You know, even if you look at last week at the election, at the US election, if you plot the results of the election based on city size, you see that the bigger the city, the more people voted actually for Hillary Clinton, the more people seem to be less scared about globalization, distressed, and so on. So cities have a very important role. It's about bringing us together and helping us to exchange ideas and learn civilization. And what is happening today in cities is particularly interesting because new technologies are allowing us to connect in even new ways, to connect physically, in physical space, but also to connect digitally using different types of networks. And that, if you want, is just the basis of what people sometimes define with this terrible word called smart cities. But it is something that's very, very profound. It's about how digital and physical are coming together, how the internet is becoming Internet of Things and is entering our physical space and our cities.
Before we move on, let's have a poll. Do you think your city is a smart city? Hashtag yes, hashtag no. 2 choices, very, very simple. We'll come back to that in the past. Ida, you have a kind of more of a, I guess, a humanistic take on cities. What do you think about this?
Well, I think the city is a very interesting place, like Carlo is saying. It's a very interesting place where we can actually do many things at the same time. If we do it right, we can do something that's good for people, for environment, and the economy. So for me, this is really the place of solutions. But I also think that we have to look at the current situation. And with the elections in US, with Brexit, looking at my own country, looking at what might happen in France, there's a clear divide between the urban and the rural population. There's a divide between city and land where I have to look back at and see what we did. And I think we were so busy globalizing, urbanizing, modernizing, that we kind of forgot those who got left behind, those who sort of felt that everything was coming out of their local communities, that town halls were closed, that police stations were closed, shops were closed. We kind of forgot them, or we didn't care enough for them. So I'm really concerned of how we can make like a new connection between city and land. How can we actually find out how much we need each other? Because actually the city cannot exist without the land. The city cannot exist without anybody producing our food, producing energy in Denmark, a lot of the export production industry is actually in the rural areas. So we really got to go back to not having this fight between city and land and trying to connect people again. And that is one of my big issues here, that we do not get overly excited in the way that we forget people.
I think that's really beautiful. It's about really almost like think about a new contract. It's not a contract, it's not about rich and poor. It's not about other differences. It's about really the urban and the rural and how we can create a new connection.
Well, and if you go back to ancient times, or maybe just a few hundred years, you had a very clear flow between city and land. So you would produce food in the land side, and you would transport it into the city, you would consume it, you would bring back the nutrients, to use a nice word, with the night train, I think we called it. But you actually had a very close connection. You would see the farmers come into the city and sell their products. So there was a much clearer connection. And it's actually still there, but maybe not in people's minds. And maybe not in the urban population are not that concerned about the rural areas. And I think this is what we see, some kind of revenge or whatever, people rising up and saying, you forgot us.
So it's not so much, Catharina, maybe about connecting smart cities around the world and globalizing. Maybe we've done enough about it. Maybe it's about catching up now and actually having smart countrysides. Maybe transportation has a role to play.
Well, it really has, but for me also, the question asked, what is a smart city? Long time ago, as Ida mentioned, I do believe that cities were a place where people had to go, maybe because of work. Today, there might be a place where you love to live. And if you have the urbanization, more and more people into the cities, then we also got some problems, you might say, and challenges due to congestions among people, traffic, the noise, the lack of space for housing, and also the problems that comes with people's health and so on. And I do believe that when we just find this out, then we also need to really struggle the problems with mobility. And mobility is not just transportation. It is a function, it is a service. And due to the lack of space, what we have seen over the years are more cars on the street, less space to walk, to bike, despite in Copenhagen though, but the needs of transportation and mobility. And that is both for passenger and for goods and freight. And becoming a smarter city, everyone with a smartphone and different devices, using new technologies as e-commerce. It's easy to lay down in your couch and press the button and just click for a new hair shampoo. But that is also a need of transportation. So for me, a smart city is when you can combine livability with smart mobility. And that's where just transportation gets the new effect. And if we could do all this based on new technologies like automation, the use of digitalization as well, and the services. Just give me one example. We are talking a lot of self-driving cars. Self-driving car is not the case. It is a part of a bigger function. If you have automation, digitalization, and the shared economy, then you start to get something really, really good that would make it possible to people to have livability in the cities, that would also make it possible to connect the city, urban areas with the rural areas in a much better way, and connect people and service.
If I could add, I think it's interesting that we, first of all, I want to say, being focused on also the connection between city and rural should not let us forget that there are so many things that need to be fixed in cities, especially some of the rapid growing cities around the world where, some of these problems that we might see in my country or in Sweden, they are tiny compared to what you see in cities that are growing at a rapid speed. So there are things that we should really, really try to answer. And we tend to think of the in the paradigm of yesterday. So first we would say, here's a car, let's put an electric engine into it. Oh, let's make this car self-driving. But if it's the same car in a road that is completely congested, it doesn't matter whether this car is autonomous or electric or whatever, you still don't get anywhere. You just get stuck in traffic. So this is why we talk about mobility, because actually, if you can get people to share a car, you can take out, I mean, a lot of cars in the streets. I think it's Singapore where they looked at how they could bring it down to about 40% of the cars if we would use them smarter. And the interesting thing about technology is that it makes sharing easy and fun and not annoying. It used to be a little bit difficult to share, you know, you would have to go in somewhere in the other end of town and get a key, and I mean, that's not what you want to do if you want to take your car. But if you can just use your neighbor's car because you have a smartphone and an app and you don't even need to know the neighbor to get into his car, or if you can find ways of carpooling, and this is what technology helps you do, it's much easier and much more fun to share, and you start then thinking completely different about transport and traffic. And I think it's very important that we do not just try to fix yesterday's paradigm, but think about how do we want a city to move.
Of course, we're in one of the most modern cities in the world here. I'd love to hear from our audience if they have any questions regarding you know, what they see as the future of their city, or what are the particular problems that they face here. Perhaps we can get a microphone, sir.
Thank you. Perhaps just to get the conversation going, if Mr. Carlo can tell us a little bit about what SENSEable City Laboratory does.
Sure.
And to you, Carlo, how do you see a smart city? What is a smart city to you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I will start by giving you what I would say the definition of smart city. Again, I think it's something quite simple, is the fact that internet is becoming physical, as we were saying, is entering the space of our cities, and so it's creating a whole new thing of possibilities in the way we deal with transportation, with energy, with citizen participation, and many other dimensions of urban life. And as we were just hearing, like something like self-driving cars are just an example of that. We wouldn't have self-driving cars if we didn't have Internet of Things, and self-driving cars can be both heaven or hell. And I just wanted to add to what was mentioned before. You know, they could be heaven if we share more, and then yes, some of our research showed we could go down even to 20% of the cars we have today. If we're able to share more, we can ride share the same ride, we can car share. The car that today is parked can actually give a lift to somebody else in our family, or to anybody else in the city. So we create like a new system which is in between public transportation and private transportation. If we do that, it's going to be a very interesting condition. We could have Dubai, 20% of the cars we have today, and still we satisfy the mobility demand of the whole city. But they can also be hell if we use the same technology in a different way. Because the same technology is going to make a ride in a car much cheaper. And because of that, you could imagine a place where you've got the subway and people stop using the subway, stop using mass transportation, everybody wants just to get a car. And then at that point, we're going to have gridlock in all of our cities. So I would say like, it's a good example of an Internet of Things technology that could potentially transform our cities immensely, but it really depends on us on how we're going to use it, on what type of policies we put in place, on how government will provide incentives or taxation in order to make sure that we end up with heaven and not with hell.
Can you tell us about any smart city which you particularly think is a model smart city in the world? And what do you think of Dubai's plans to become a smart city?
Look, I always get this question, what is the smartest city in the world? And I don't think you can answer this question. If I had to answer this question, I would use the words of a great writer from the past century called Georges Perec, French writer. And once he was asked, where is the best place to live in Paris? And he said, well, I'd like to have my kitchen facing the Halles, my living room facing this park, and my bedroom facing this other place. So everything, so in the same way you could say that today the smartest city is something that combines some of the experiences that are happening in different places. Copenhagen is doing a lot of great work with sustainability. Boston with citizen participation, Singapore with mobility. I think Dubai is starting now with the Smart Dubai experiment. That's quite interesting. I was talking about it last night, about their focus on happiness, seeing how how you can look at some parameters, and you can start from that in order to implement different initiatives. It seems to me also about government, how government could be made more efficient and digitized. So I think probably today's best example is a combination of all of these.
Catharina, you want to come in there?
Yeah, because I also, for me, I have a very typical Swedish perspective maybe, but in somehow, no matter where in the world we live, we have about the same challenges, but the solutions might be different. So if we have the overall common goal that we do believe that we have to do something about our climate, about our consumption, about our resources, then it is up to us how we plan where we live, because still in our everyday life people will feel that they are happy, and what makes us happy, if we have good health, if we connect with other people, if we have work, good education for our kids, equality, it could be many different ways. So when it comes to city planning perspective, I do really believe that it's important that we don't think mobility as itself, building houses at itself, energy at itself. It must be combined. So when you're planning for new areas, never build new houses without thinking of mobility, and especially also city transportations. And even though we like to share and go riding together in a bus, for example, people still would like to have options made on their individual choices. That's where I mean that a smart city could be helped by new technology, real information in real time, making me do the good choices. And it could be options from time, cost, function, health situation, and I can do the choice. So it's more of doing this together and use new technologies as well.
Thanks, Catharina. And Anida, I know you want to come in, but a couple of quick housekeeping remarks. Those of you watching at home, the audio levels are low in this room compared to what you've been used to in the booth, so you might want to use headphones. And don't forget to vote. Is your city a smart city? We'd love to hear your answer there. Hashtag yes, hashtag no. Right, look, we've got audience from all over the world, so I want to talk to some of our audiences maybe in less, in more emerging parts of the world, because cities are running out of control in a lot of different places. So, Carlo, you don't really like to talk about what the best city is, but give us a couple of ideas that are cheap, easily achievable and scalable, that we can help to kind of ameliorate some of the stresses on urbanization in some of the more populous parts of the world. And Catharina, so maybe some brief thoughts on whether autonomous vehicles can have a role to play in emerging cities as well. Either, if you have any comments, I'd love to hear yours too. Carlo, you first.
Yeah, so I'd say it's difficult to say without knowing which part of the world we're looking at. I don't think there's a general smart city solution. There's actually something that you want to look at for this city or the other city based on the local conditions. Mobility is certainly something quite interesting. Even before we look at self-driving cars, which are a reality today, looking at different ways of car sharing again is quite interesting. Every shared car can remove around 20 to 30 cars from the street, just because it's used more. Instead of being used in the United States, a car on average is used 5% of the time. 95% of the time is parked somewhere occupying valuable land in our cities. So if we do car sharing, even just the basic way we do it today, thanks again to digital technologies, the cars like Car2Go or Zipcar and so on, then that's going to be beneficial for the whole city. Every car removes quite a lot of other cars from the road. The other thing I would look like, probably, if you want to ask for a more general solution, is probably citizen participation, because it's very important that we reconnect with citizens using new technologies. And I would say that's probably number one thing you can do all around the world, because if you manage to do that, then many of the other things can actually be delegated to citizens. Citizens themselves can take action. So if we start from that, we start from using networks, using digital and physical connections in order to create a new engagement among citizens, that's probably the first step to then look at most of the other dimensions of the city, to get citizens' feedback in order to see what is the next important step to do. So that probably could be the first thing you might want to look at as a mayor around the world.
Well, I'm just thinking in these times where we talk a lot about autonomous cars and car sharing, we really have to think about creating cities for people and not cities for cars. I think we made that mistake several times, designing cities for cars. And let me give me an example that would go to an emerging market like India. So if you take a city like Mumbai, you might think that you need to modernize the city by paving everything and creating like big roads that people can drive in the city. This city is completely congested. Actually, one thing that is working is that people walk. I think it's up to 40% or maybe even more of people who walk. But if you end up taking away the sidewalks because you want to create space for all these smart cars, you actually destroy a well-functioning infrastructure. So we can't solve mobility by just building more roads. Anybody who's researched on roads and congestion know that every time you build a new road, it will take 2, 3, 4 months, and it's cramped too. It's jammed. So you definitely need to think about how you can get more people into the same vehicle, or how you can get vehicles off the road, or how you can get people walking and on bikes. So start by not destroying what you already have. Think about designing cities for people. Think about whole systems. Like in Denmark, you have the CEO riding his bike right next to the cleaning lady. This creates a beautiful public space where people actually do not have to state their status with some kind of car, but just they are human beings. It creates a very, very nice, not egalitarian, but it's a society where we do not have to all the time sort of put ourselves out there in our big cars to be human beings. And I think this is very important to think about. What do you get your people to aspire to? What kind of consumption do you tell them is something that creates a good life? And you really have to think about that when we talk about all of this kind of mobility. Because, 50 people in a bus and 50 people in cars. Think about how much space that takes in a city and how much quicker you can move people.
Which brings me to let's try to run through a few questions because we're running out of time. Susanna Rendon, a really good question here. Is smart necessarily desirable? What are its limitations and drawbacks? Catharina, we're talking about mobility quite a lot. Maybe you have some thoughts there.
I didn't hear the question.
Is smart desirable?
Desirable? What's desirable?
Desirable, something to be desired. Do we want smart cities?
Attractive. Okay, sorry. But back to where you ended. I also do really believe that we have to understand the differences so far in the world, because a bike used to be the poor man's vehicle before. And if I talk to friends, for example, in India, they're just longing for buying a car, and it doesn't matter if they can use the car because of the congestion. They would love to have it parked outside their home just to show everyone else the success and the new richness. So it's like a frog leap. We have to come far. So smart, for me, is using resources in a better way, combining them together so we have, back again, livability for people. And in some way, we also have, in areas where there are more and more of cars, the loss of family members due to safety or unsafety on unsecured roads. So we really have to mix. And I do believe that automated cars, self-driving cars, will also help when it comes to road safety. Combining people walking, biking, or whatever. And also don't forget that buses today in cities, when we ask people to leave their cars and go by bus, and what they get is overcrowded buses where it's hot and not convenient at all, and they are leaving on times that is not suitable for you as an individual. So that's why I would like to stress the use of technology as digitization, where you can choose your options and make it possible for people to leave when they need and how they can do it in a smarter way. So autonomous car is one thing, but that's not the only thing. It's the combining.
Okay, can I add something just briefly about, is smart desirable? Well, it's like asking, is the internet desirable? And so many things are very desirable and other things could be less desirable. I think, it's nothing else than Internet of Things. So internet entering physical space, and so it's happening now. It's a new technology, and some of it could be great. Some of it will certainly pose threats, and it's up to us to manage it.
So let's just do one or two more questions. Abhijat Kale from India, you're writing and saying, with all these technologies, do you think we will go away from nature in a smart city environment, and will it have some adverse effect? on mankind. Again, it's playing to you. Are we forgetting the basics here? We're forgetting about parks and trees and pavements.
No.
I've always wondered, why do we want to fill out every empty space of our city with concrete? I mean, we know that watching trees and green make us happy. This is something that actually goes to our hearts. It's the first words that we teach our kids. It's the name of the animals, the trees, whatever. So it is something very inherent to us. But when we become urban dwellers, we do lose some kind of connection to nature. It is something that we go out and watch or have a little fun in, or, I mean, we completely forget that we are extremely dependent on nature. So I think creating livability in cities is also creating green. And it's also creating, you know, green canopies. It's creating much better climate. It's getting temperatures down in hot cities, and it's helping get water stored when it's raining really heavily. You need green areas. So let's get away from the idea that concrete everywhere is smart and beautiful. It's a little bit stupid, if you ask me.
Being a bit of a geek when it comes to the Global Council on Smart Cities, one of my favourite initiatives over the past 2-year term was the top 10 innovations that your council produced, and one of those was internet adoption of trees in Melbourne. I think it was a lovely scheme where you could email a tree, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I'd love to know how that goes. But I'm going to end on a kind of a poll result which may put Carlo especially out of a job. Because our final poll results say, and this is a scientific poll, representative, huge global survey, 75% of people think their city is smart. So Carlo, you've done your job already. Job done, time to go home and retire. What do you think about that? Accurate assessment or slightly ambitious?
It's very interesting. I mean, again, it depends how we define smart, but I think that's encouraging. Is about thinking that ultimately, we can improve our cities. Certainly people have been thinking, is it smart or not? Is they've been thinking, how it has been improving over the recent years? How is it improving? So it seems to me like quite a bit like a message of hope about the city. And again, I think the label smart city is terrible. I try not to use it. But what is behind it is actually quite exciting. And think about it like a new era of urban development with computing that can address many issues. And if you play it right, about connecting with each other, about bringing nature back into cities, again, in the 20th century, we lost the trees. Now we can bring them back. We can bring back also urban farming, and a lot of that becomes easier to do with the Internet of Things, with some of these technologies. And that's, combining that old dream of Elmsäter-Svärd, who was one of the first planners of modern times, who said, how can we combine the pleasure of nature and also the excitement of the city?
So many questions, and I wish we could cover all of them. I'm not going to have time to answer this, but I'm going to float it out there because maybe something for your councils to go away and think about. Pierre Melès, a few minutes ago, wrote in, is the topic limited to mobility? What about smart green cities, safe cities, smart administration, etc.? So many areas we haven't even covered. If only we had 4 hours to continue this conversation, but we don't. You've got to get back to your councils, and we've all got other things to do, go back to work or whatever. It's Monday morning in various parts of the world. Right here, people will be getting ready to get on the bus or maybe on their bike, walk through the park, who knows. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us here in the panel, those of us in the room, and thank you for watching us live online at weforum.org.
Thank you. Thanks.